Tonight, we begin in the Nevada desert, in a place that has become so famous that its name almost feels fictional, even though the ground itself is very real. Area 51. A patch of remote dry lakebed and restricted airspace, tucked within the larger Nevada test and training range, far from city lights and ordinary roads, where official silence has always done almost as much work as any fence or warning sign. If you're settling in with me tonight, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know where in the world you're listening from, because there is something strangely fitting about talking about hidden places while voices from all over the planet gather in the dark to think about them together. And Area 51 is one of those rare subjects that sits exactly at the border between documented history and lingering uncertainty. On one side, there is the mainstream explanation, a secret test facility used for highly classified aircraft and defense programs, especially during the Cold War. On the other side, there is the alternative perspective that refuses to go away, that a place protected with this much intensity, surrounded by this much myth, may have housed activities the public still does not fully understand. The interesting thing is that we do not need to leap into fantasy to appreciate how strange that tension really is. Even the confirmed story is unusual enough. The CIA has acknowledged Groom Lake, also known as Area 51, as a secret test site connected to the U-2 and A-12 programs, and declassified histories show that the site was selected in 1955 because its remoteness, natural geography, and existing security environment made it ideal for flight testing aircraft that could not be hidden at normal bases. That alone gives us a grounded starting point. A real place, built for secrecy, used to fly machines so advanced that many people who glimpsed them in the sky had no framework to understand what they were seeing. And that is where the mythology becomes more interesting, not less. Because once you accept the mainstream account, once you accept that the US government was indeed flying radically unfamiliar aircraft in secret over the desert, then a lot of what later came to be dismissed as absurd starts looking slightly different. During the 1950s, the U-2 flew far higher than commercial or military aircraft that ordinary observers were used to seeing, and the CIA itself has noted that many UFO reports in that era were tied to test flights of advanced reconnaissance planes. In other words, some of the confusion was not accidental background noise surrounding the base. It was the natural result of highly classified technology appearing before the public was prepared to recognize it. A person standing in the desert, or even a pilot seeing an unusual silhouette at extreme altitude, might sincerely report something extraordinary, because from that person's point of view, it was extraordinary. This matters because it creates a pattern that echoes through the entire history of Area 51. Genuine secrecy produces genuine uncertainty, and genuine uncertainty attracts speculation. The public was not wrong to sense that something hidden was happening. What they often lacked was the category to describe it. So when we hear the official version that Area 51 was mainly about secret aircraft, it is worth pausing before we treat that answer as simple or complete. Secret aircraft is not a small thing. It means prototypes, black budgets, compartmentalized work, false cover stories, restricted maps, and a system designed so that even many insiders only knew fragments. Once a place operates like that for decades, it almost manufactures rumors by its very structure. The mystery does not begin after the facts run out. In a place like this, the mystery begins because the facts were deliberately broken into pieces from the start. What makes Area 51 especially compelling is that official acknowledgement arrived very late, long after the base had already become a cultural symbol. For years, the government provided minimal public information, and references to the site were heavily obscured even in released records. One reason the 2013 declassification wave drew so much attention is that it confirmed what had been publicly suspected for decades. This legendary installation was not just folklore or conspiracy fuel, but a real Cold War test center with a direct role in programs like the U-2, a 12-ox cart, and later, stealth-related work. The National Security Archive has highlighted records showing Area 51's connection not only to experimental American aircraft, but also to testing involving foreign radar systems and even secretly acquired Soviet MiG fighters. That detail is especially revealing because it shows the base was not merely a runway in the desert. It was a laboratory of strategic deception, technical comparison, and controlled invisibility. It was a place where engineers and intelligence planners could ask not only how an aircraft should fly, but how it should appear on radar, how it might be misidentified, how it could survive in hostile airspace, and what an adversary would think they were seeing. When you frame Area 51 that way, the distance between official history and alternative suspicion narrows a little. Not because aliens become more likely, but because the confirmed mission of the base was already rooted in shaping perception. It was built around the management of what others could know. And whenever a facility is engaged in testing technology that changes what can be seen, tracked, or interpreted, it will always invite a deeper question. If we only learned part of the story decades later, how confident should we be that we have learned all of it now? That is not a declaration that something fantastical lies hidden there. It is simply a sober recognition that secrecy has a long half-life, and institutions created to conceal capabilities do not suddenly become transparent just because one chapter has been declassified. There is also something psychologically fascinating about the geography of Area 51 itself. Not just the desert, but the way the desert functions in the American imagination. Vast, empty land has always acted like a projection screen. People look into remote landscapes and fill the silence with whatever they fear, hope, or suspect. In the case of Groom Lake, that process was supercharged by heavy security, restricted airspace, and the now famous though still mundane mechanics of personnel transport, including the discreet movement of workers by specialized flights rather than open highways. Even if a person knew nothing about aviation history, the sheer behavior surrounding the place would communicate one message very clearly. Whatever happens, there is meant to stay there. And once that message becomes public, every odd light, every sonic boom, every unusual shape glimpsed above the mountains becomes part of a larger story. The mainstream explanation says these were the side effects of prototype testing, stealth development, reconnaissance platforms, and military research hidden from foreign intelligence. The alternative perspective asks whether such an explanation, while true in broad outline, may still be incomplete around the edges. Could multiple categories of projects have existed there over time? Almost certainly. Did every rumor point to extraterrestrial craft? There is no credible public evidence that it did. But is it unreasonable to think the full inventory of activities at such a facility remains unknown to the public? Not at all. In fact, that may be the most grounded position of all. The temptation is always to choose between total skepticism and total belief, but the calmer approach is to stay in the middle, where the evidence lives. Yes, many wild claims likely grew out of misunderstood aircraft tests. Yes, the base really was used for profoundly secret and technologically unusual work. And yes, the history of that secrecy gives people rational reasons to suspect there may be more to learn. So as we ease into this series, that is the frame I want us to keep. Not that Area 51 is a magic answer to every unknown, and not that its mystery disappears the moment we say Cold War aircraft testing. Both extremes flatten the subject. The more interesting path is slower. It asks how a secret base becomes a legend, how advanced technology can look supernatural before it becomes familiar, how governments use isolation and compartmentalization to protect strategic advantages, and how public imagination responds when it senses a hidden reality but cannot clearly define it. In the parts ahead, we will move carefully through the origins of the base, the aircraft that helped create its reputation, the strange relationship between UFO culture and classified aerospace development, the role of declassified records, the strange persistence of witness stories, and the harder question beneath all of it. Not, is every rumor true, but why did this particular place become the world's symbol for the possibility that official explanations never tell the whole story? That, I think, is the most intelligent way to approach Area 51 at night, with curiosity, but without surrendering judgment, because sometimes the unknown is not hidden in a dramatic revelation. Sometimes it lives in the gap between what was denied, what was later admitted, and what still remains just out of view beyond the fence line, under a still desert sky. As we move deeper into this story, it helps to slow down and return to the beginning, not in terms of mythology, but in terms of timing, geography, and decision-making, because Area 51 did not appear out of nowhere. It was selected, deliberately, during a very specific moment in history when the United States faced a problem that felt both urgent and invisible at the same time. In the early years of the Cold War, intelligence about the Soviet Union was limited, fragmented, and often outdated by the time it reached analysts. Satellite reconnaissance did not yet exist in any meaningful form, and traditional spy methods carried enormous risk. What was needed, at least from the perspective of US planners, was a way to see deep into denied territory without being detected, and that requirement led directly to the development of one of the most unusual aircraft of its time, the Lockheed U-2. The U-2 was not just another airplane. It was designed to fly at altitudes so high that in theory, it would remain beyond the reach of enemy defenses and outside the expectations of conventional aviation. But designing such an aircraft was only part of the challenge. Testing it required a place where failure could remain invisible, where experimental flights could occur without attracting attention, and where the presence of something radically new in the sky would not immediately become public knowledge. That is where Groom Lake entered the picture. The site, which would later become synonymous with Area 51, was chosen in 1955 after aerial surveys identified it as an ideal location. A dry lakebed that could serve as a natural runway, surrounded by mountain ranges that limited visibility, and already situated within a broader military testing area. From a purely practical standpoint, it made sense. But what is interesting is how quickly practicality began to blend with secrecy at a deeper level. Workers were brought in under tight restrictions, operations were compartmentalized, and even maps of the region were altered or simplified to obscure details. The base was not just hidden physically, it was gradually removed from the ordinary systems of public knowledge. And this is where the mainstream explanation begins to intersect with something more subtle. On paper, this was a testing facility for a reconnaissance aircraft. In practice, it was also an experiment in controlled information, a place where visibility itself, what could be seen, known, or confirmed, was carefully managed. When the U-2 began flying, it immediately introduced a new kind of confusion into the skies. Commercial pilots and civilians occasionally reported strange objects at extreme altitudes, objects that appeared to move in unfamiliar ways or reflect sunlight differently than expected. At the time, these reports often fed into the growing wave of UFO sightings that had already begun to capture public attention. The official explanation, which would come much later, is that many of these sightings were likely misidentified U-2 flights. From a rational standpoint, that explanation holds weight, but it also introduces an interesting pattern. Real, classified technology was being mistaken for something unknown, and because the technology itself could not be acknowledged, the misunderstanding was allowed to persist. In other words, the government was in a position where correcting the narrative would have required revealing the secret. So the narrative remained uncorrected, and speculation filled the gap. This is not evidence of extraterrestrial activity, but it is evidence of something equally important: that for a period of time, the public's perception of reality was shaped by the presence of machines that officially did not exist. As the years passed, Area 51 became associated with more advanced projects, including the Lockheed A-12 Oxcart, a successor to the U-2 that pushed speed and altitude even further. The A-12 was capable of flying at over Mach 3, and its development introduced new challenges in materials, heat resistance, and radar visibility. Again, the mainstream explanation is straightforward. This was part of an ongoing effort to maintain strategic advantage during the Cold War. But if we look more closely, we can see that each new generation of aircraft did more than just improve performance. It altered the boundary between what was familiar and what was not. A person witnessing an A-12 test flight without context might describe something that sounded almost impossible. A craft moving at extraordinary speed, leaving unusual visual signatures, perhaps appearing and disappearing in ways that did not align with known aviation. And once again, because these programs were deeply classified, there was no immediate way to reconcile those observations with official knowledge. This pattern, advanced technology, limited information, and public uncertainty, continued into later decades with the development of stealth aircraft, including the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk. The F-117, with its angular, faceted design, looked unlike any conventional aircraft before it. Its shape was dictated not by aerodynamics alone, but by the need to reduce radar cross-section, resulting in a silhouette that many described as almost alien in appearance. Before its existence was publicly acknowledged, sightings of unusual triangular or angular craft were reported by observers in and around testing areas. Once again, the mainstream explanation eventually caught up. These were early stealth prototypes. But for years, those sightings existed in a space of ambiguity, where they could not be easily explained or verified. And this repetition is where the story of Area 51 becomes more layered. It is not just that people saw strange things. It is that, in multiple documented instances, the strange things turned out to be real, human-made technologies that had simply been hidden from public view. At this point, it is worth pausing and asking a careful question, not to jump to conclusions, but to understand the structure of the mystery itself. If Area 51 has a documented history of testing aircraft that were decades ahead of publicly acknowledged technology, and if those aircraft consistently produce sightings that were initially unexplained, then what does that imply about the relationship between secrecy and perception? The mainstream answer would say that it explains most, if not all, of the mystery, that what people interpreted as unknown phenomena were in fact classified but entirely terrestrial projects. And there is strong evidence supporting that view, but the alternative perspective does not necessarily reject it. Instead, it asks whether the pattern itself leaves room for additional layers, not necessarily extraterrestrial ones, but layers of development, experimentation, or failure that have not yet been disclosed. After all, the history of Area 51 shows that major programs can remain hidden for years, even decades, before being acknowledged. So the question becomes less about whether the known explanation is true, and more about whether it is complete. There is also the human element to consider. The people who worked there, often under strict secrecy agreements, moving in and out of the base without publicly discussing what they saw or did. Some former employees have spoken in general terms about the intensity of the work, the isolation, and the sense that they were involved in something significant but compartmentalized. Others have made more dramatic claims, which are often difficult to verify and should be approached with caution. The challenge here is not to accept or dismiss these accounts outright, but to place them within the broader context of how classified programs operate. In environments where information is tightly controlled, even participants may only see a small part of the whole. This can create situations where individuals interpret incomplete data in ways that feel meaningful but may not reflect the full reality. At the same time, it also means that no single perspective, whether official or personal, is likely to capture the entire picture. So as we continue, the shape of Area 51 begins to emerge more clearly, not as a single secret waiting to be revealed, but as a system designed around secrecy itself. A place where advanced technology was developed ahead of public awareness, where sightings of the unusual were both real and misunderstood, and where the line between explanation and speculation has always been blurred by design. The mainstream story gives us a solid foundation: reconnaissance aircraft, stealth development, Cold War strategy. The alternative perspective invites us to remain open to the possibility that the full story, like the desert horizon, may extend further than we can currently see. And perhaps that is the most grounded conclusion we can reach at this stage. Not that something extraordinary must be hidden there, but that a place built to conceal innovation will always appear, from the outside, as something more than it openly admits to being. If we continue along this path, the next layer of the story begins not with what was built at Area 51, but with how the world outside it started to react. Because by the late 1950s and into the 1960s, something subtle but important had already taken hold. The base itself was still officially unacknowledged, its operations obscured, its purpose fragmented across classified programs, and yet, beyond the fences and dry lake beds, a parallel narrative was forming. People were seeing things in the sky that did not fit their expectations, and more importantly, those observations were being recorded, discussed, and gradually woven into a larger cultural pattern. This is where the story of Area 51 begins to overlap with the broader history of unidentified flying objects, not as a confirmation of extraordinary claims, but as a convergence of two timelines, one grounded in secret technological development, and the other grounded in human perception trying to interpret unfamiliar signals. In 1947, nearly a decade before the U-2 ever took flight over Nevada, an event occurred near the small town of Roswell that would become one of the most enduring reference points in UFO history. The mainstream explanation, which evolved over time, concluded that the debris recovered was part of a classified high-altitude balloon project known as Project Mogul, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. From a factual standpoint, this explanation aligns with declassified records and technical capabilities of the era. But what matters for our purposes is not just what happened at Roswell, but how it was communicated. Initial reports suggested a flying disc, followed by a rapid retraction and replacement narrative involving a weather balloon. That shift, whether justified or not, introduced a fracture in public trust. It created a situation where the official explanation changed in a way that felt abrupt and incomplete, and once that perception took root, it became a template for how future unexplained events would be interpreted. By the time Area 51 was actively testing advanced aircraft, the cultural groundwork had already been laid. People were primed to suspect that unusual objects in the sky might be more than they appeared, and that official explanations might not tell the full story. As sightings increased during the 1950s and 1960s, the US government responded with formal investigations, including Project Blue Book, which aimed to collect and analyze reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. The mainstream conclusion of Project Blue Book, after reviewing thousands of cases, was that most sightings could be explained as misidentified natural phenomena, aircraft, or other conventional sources, and that none provided evidence of extraterrestrial technology. On the surface, this appears to settle the matter. But when we place this conclusion alongside what we now know about Area 51, a more nuanced picture emerges. During the same period that Blue Book was categorizing sightings, classified aircraft like the U-2 and A-12 were actively being tested, often in ways that would produce exactly the kind of unusual observations being reported. However, because these programs were secret, investigators could not always publicly attribute sightings to their true cause. This creates an interesting tension. Official investigations were attempting to explain sightings without access to the full set of variables, while the public was interpreting those same sightings without access to classified context. Both sides were, in a sense, working with incomplete information. This is where the story becomes less about individual sightings and more about patterns of information flow. When a system produces data that cannot be fully disclosed, the explanations derived from that data will always appear partial. And when those partial explanations are repeated over time, they can begin to erode confidence, even if they are technically accurate within the limits of what can be revealed. In the case of Area 51, this dynamic may have unintentionally reinforced the very speculation it was trying to avoid. Each unexplained light, each unusual radar signature, each pilot report that did not neatly align with known aircraft characteristics added another piece to a growing narrative that something beyond conventional understanding was occurring. The mainstream perspective would argue that these were artifacts of secrecy, not evidence of anything non-human. And again, there is strong support for that view. But the alternative perspective asks a slightly different question. Not, were these sightings extraterrestrial? But, did the structure of secrecy itself create a feedback loop where uncertainty became self-sustaining? To explore that idea, it helps to consider how advanced aerospace development intersects with human perception. When a new technology emerges, especially one that operates outside existing norms, it often appears strange or even impossible until it becomes familiar. Early jet aircraft, for example, were once described as unnatural or alarming by observers accustomed to propeller-driven planes. Stealth aircraft, with their unconventional shapes and flight characteristics, challenged visual expectations even further. Now imagine encountering such technology without any prior knowledge of its existence, in a context where official sources either deny or cannot confirm what you have seen. The result is not just confusion, but a kind of cognitive gap, a space where interpretation becomes highly flexible. Some people will default to conventional explanations, others will explore more speculative possibilities, and over time, those interpretations can solidify into competing narratives that coexist without fully resolving. Area 51 sits at the center of this dynamic, not necessarily because it contains extraordinary secrets beyond human technology, but because it has consistently operated at the edge of what is publicly known. It is a place where the timeline of development runs ahead of the timeline of disclosure, and that gap creates room for interpretation. When we look back at the history of UFO sightings through this lens, a pattern begins to emerge that is both grounded and intriguing. Many sightings occurred in regions and time periods that overlap with known testing activities. Many descriptions of unidentified objects share characteristics with experimental aircraft that were later revealed. And yet, not every case fits neatly into that framework. There remain reports, particularly from trained observers such as pilots and radar operators, that describe behaviors or performance characteristics not easily explained by the technologies we know were in development at the time. The mainstream approach is to treat these as anomalies, cases where data is insufficient or observations are misinterpreted. The alternative approach is to treat them as open questions, not proof of anything extraordinary, but indicators that our understanding may be incomplete. What makes this especially interesting is that the US government's approach to unidentified aerial phenomena has evolved over time. In recent years, there has been a shift toward more open acknowledgement that certain encounters remain unexplained, even after analysis. This does not imply extraterrestrial origin, but it does suggest that the category of unknown still exists within a system that has access to far more advanced technology and data than was available during the early Cold War. When we connect this modern perspective back to the history of Area 51, it raises a subtle but important point. If a facility like Area 51 was capable of producing technologies that appeared inexplicable to observers decades ago, then it is reasonable to ask whether similar gaps might exist today, not necessarily at the same location, but within the broader landscape of classified research. And if those gaps exist, how would we distinguish between genuinely unknown phenomena and technologies that are simply not yet disclosed? As we sit with that question, the story of Area 51 becomes less about a single secret and more about an ongoing process, a continuous interplay between innovation, secrecy, and perception. The base itself is part of that process, but so is the public response to it, the investigations that attempt to make sense of it, and the cultural narratives that grow around it. The mainstream explanation provides a strong foundation, one that accounts for a significant portion of the mystery through documented programs and declassified records. The alternative perspective invites us to remain attentive to the edges of that explanation, to the places where information is incomplete, where patterns are suggestive but not definitive, and where the possibility of additional layers cannot be entirely ruled out. And perhaps that is where the real intrigue of Area 51 lies, not in any single claim or theory, but in the way it reveals how knowledge itself is shaped. What we know is influenced not only by what exists, but by what is revealed, when it is revealed, and how it is framed. A place like Area 51, by design, disrupts that process. It withholds, delays, and fragments information in ways that make certainty difficult to achieve. And in that uncertainty, the mind naturally begins to explore possibilities, some grounded, some speculative, all part of an attempt to fill in the gaps. As we continue, we will look more closely at those gaps, not to fill them with assumptions, but to understand why they exist, how they have been maintained, and what they might tell us about the boundaries between what is known and what remains just beyond our current view. As we move further into this quiet exploration, it becomes useful to shift our attention from what was seen in the sky to what was heard on the ground, because one of the most persistent and often overlooked aspects of Area 51 is not visual at all, but acoustic. Long before the base was publicly acknowledged, residents, travelers, and workers in the broader Nevada region reported strange sounds echoing across the desert. Deep, distant booms, low-frequency rumbles, and vibrations that seemed to arrive without warning and disappear just as quickly. The mainstream explanation for many of these phenomena is well established. Sonic booms produced by high-speed aircraft, particularly those pushing into supersonic and hypersonic regimes during test flights. When an aircraft exceeds the speed of sound, it generates a shockwave that can travel significant distances, often perceived as a sudden, explosive noise on the ground. In a region like Nevada, with its vast open spaces and minimal background noise, these effects can feel especially pronounced, almost unnatural in their clarity and intensity. But what makes this more interesting is not simply that these sounds occurred, but how they were experienced and interpreted. For someone unaware of ongoing test programs, a sonic boom is not immediately recognizable as a routine byproduct of flight. It can feel like an isolated event, detached from any visible cause, particularly if the aircraft responsible is flying at an altitude or angle that makes it difficult to see. This creates a kind of sensory disconnect, where the ear detects something powerful and real, but the eye finds nothing to confirm it. Over time, repeated experiences like this can begin to form patterns in the mind, especially when they are shared among communities. Stories emerge, descriptions are compared, and gradually, a collective sense develops that something unusual is happening beyond the horizon. The mainstream explanation remains consistent: advanced aircraft testing, operating under conditions that produce these acoustic signatures. But the alternative perspective asks a more subtle question. When sensory experiences are repeatedly disconnected from visible confirmation, how does that shape the way people interpret reality? This question becomes even more layered when we consider the types of aircraft that were being tested. By the time programs like the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird entered the picture, The boundaries of speed, altitude, and thermal stress were being pushed to extremes that had rarely been encountered before. The SR-71, capable of speeds exceeding Mach 3, did not just move through the air, it interacted with it in ways that produced unique physical effects, including intense heating and distinctive shockwave patterns. While much of its testing occurred at other locations, the broader ecosystem of high-speed flight development in the Nevada region contributed to an environment where unusual auditory phenomena were not just possible, but expected. And yet, from the perspective of someone outside that ecosystem, these sounds could feel disconnected from any known source, especially in an era when public awareness of such capabilities was limited. There is also another dimension to consider, one that sits at the intersection of technology and psychology. Sound, unlike sight, is inherently immersive. It surrounds the listener, penetrates distance, and often arrives without clear directional cues. In a quiet desert setting, where the absence of noise becomes the baseline, any sudden disturbance can feel amplified, almost intrusive. This can lead to interpretations that extend beyond the physical event itself, particularly when combined with the broader context of secrecy surrounding Area 51. If you hear something you cannot see, in a place you know is restricted, and you are aware that unusual activities are rumored to occur there, your mind naturally begins to connect those elements. The mainstream explanation would ground this in known physics and aviation, and that grounding is important. But the alternative perspective invites us to observe how the human brain responds to incomplete sensory information, especially in environments where confirmation is deliberately limited. Beyond sonic booms, there have also been reports of more subtle acoustic phenomena, low-frequency hums or vibrations that seem to persist over longer periods. These are more difficult to attribute with certainty, as they can arise from a variety of sources, including distant machinery, atmospheric conditions, or even geological factors. In the context of a highly classified test range, however, they take on additional significance. Could they be related to experimental propulsion systems, ground-based testing equipment, or other forms of activity that have not been publicly detailed? It is possible, though not provable with the information available. The mainstream approach would caution against drawing direct connections without evidence, emphasizing that many such sounds can be explained through conventional means. The alternative approach does not reject those explanations, but remains open to the idea that not all sources may be fully documented in the public domain. What becomes clear as we sit with this aspect of the story is that Area 51 has never been defined solely by what can be seen. It is equally shaped by what can be felt, heard, and inferred. The desert itself plays a role in this, acting almost like an amplifier for certain experiences while concealing others. Heat layers in the atmosphere can bend sound waves, allowing them to travel further than expected. Temperature gradients can distort perception, making distant events feel closer or more immediate. Even the time of day can influence how sound behaves, with cooler nighttime air often carrying vibrations more efficiently across long distances. All of these factors contribute to an environment where ordinary physical processes can produce extraordinary impressions, especially when combined with the knowledge that something secretive is occurring nearby. And this brings us back to a broader pattern that continues to emerge as we explore Area 51 from different angles. Whether we are looking at visual sightings, official investigations, or acoustic experiences, the same dynamic appears again and again. Real phenomena, grounded in physics and engineering, interacting with limited information and human perception to create a layered sense of mystery. The mainstream explanation provides clarity where it can, linking sounds to supersonic flight, vibrations to known sources, and patterns to documented programs. But the alternative perspective reminds us that clarity is often partial, shaped by what is disclosed and what remains classified. In a place designed to operate beyond public visibility, even ordinary events can take on an unusual character simply because their context is hidden. So as we continue, it becomes less useful to ask whether Area 51 is mysterious in a dramatic sense, and more useful to understand how its mystery is constructed piece by piece through interactions between technology, environment, and perception. The sounds in the desert are one part of that construction, a reminder that not all evidence is visual, and that the absence of a visible source can be just as powerful as the presence of an unexplained object. In the next part, we will begin to look more closely at the human stories connected to Area 51, the workers, the witnesses, and the narratives that have emerged from those who have claimed to see beyond the official boundaries. Not to accept or reject them outright, but to examine how personal experience fits into a system built on secrecy, and what those experiences might reveal about the limits of what we can truly know from the outside. As we move into the human side of this story, the tone shifts slightly, because now we are no longer dealing only with aircraft, radar signatures, or distant sounds echoing across the desert. We are dealing with people, individuals who, at various points in time, have claimed to step closer to the boundary of Area 51 than most ever will, and who have attempted, in different ways, to describe what they believe they experienced. This is where the narrative becomes more delicate, because human testimony exists in a space that is neither purely factual nor purely fictional. It is shaped by memory, perception, context, and sometimes by misunderstanding. The mainstream approach to these accounts is cautious, often skeptical, emphasizing the lack of verifiable evidence and the challenges of confirming claims tied to highly classified environments. And that caution is important. But the alternative perspective does not require us to accept every claim at face value in order to find them interesting. Instead, it asks us to examine why these stories emerge, what patterns they share, and how they fit into the broader structure of secrecy that defines Area 51. One of the most well-known figures associated with these narratives is Bob Lazar, a name that has become almost inseparable from the more speculative side of Area 51's reputation. In 1989, Lazar publicly claimed that he had worked at a site near Area 51, often referred to as S4, where he alleged involvement in the study of advanced propulsion systems derived from non-human technology. The mainstream response to Lazar's claims has been largely critical, pointing to inconsistencies in his educational background, the absence of verifiable records supporting his employment, and the extraordinary nature of his assertions. From a conventional standpoint, these issues significantly weaken the credibility of his story. And yet, despite decades of scrutiny, Lazar's account has not disappeared. It continues to circulate, to be discussed, and to influence how people think about Area 51. This persistence is worth examining, not as proof of his claims, but as an indicator of how certain narratives resonate within a context already shaped by secrecy and partial disclosure. If we step back for a moment, we can see that Lazar's story did not emerge in isolation. It appeared at a time when Area 51 was still officially unacknowledged, when public understanding of its activities was limited, and when the gap between what was suspected and what was confirmed was particularly wide. In such an environment, a detailed, confident narrative, even one that cannot be verified, can gain traction simply because it offers a sense of structure to the unknown. Lazar describes specific elements, propulsion systems, materials, testing procedures. Whether or not these descriptions correspond to reality, they provide a framework that people can engage with, analyze, and debate. The mainstream explanation would suggest that this framework is constructed, either intentionally or unintentionally, from a combination of imagination, misinterpretation, and perhaps exposure to real but unrelated information. The alternative perspective does not necessarily dispute that, but it asks a different question. Why do certain stories, among countless others, become central to the conversation, while others fade away? Part of the answer may lie in the way these accounts intersect with known truths. Area 51 is a real place used for highly classified work. Advanced technologies have been developed there, often years or decades ahead of public awareness. Information has been deliberately withheld and later revealed in stages. When a narrative like Lazar's enters this environment, it does not need to be fully accurate to feel plausible. It only needs to align, in certain ways, with the established pattern of secrecy and delayed disclosure. This creates a kind of overlap, where elements of the story seem to fit within the broader context, even if the more extraordinary claims remain unsupported. For an audience already aware that the government has hidden significant technological developments in the past, the leap from hidden aircraft to hidden discoveries becomes easier to imagine, even if it is not substantiated by evidence. There are, of course, many other individuals who have made claims about Area 51 or related facilities, though few have achieved the same level of recognition. Some describe working on advanced propulsion concepts. Others speak of unusual materials or experimental systems, and some simply recount observations of aircraft that did not resemble anything publicly known at the time. The mainstream approach treats these accounts as anecdotal, often unverifiable, and therefore not reliable as evidence. And again, that position is grounded in sound reasoning. Without corroboration, documentation, or independent confirmation, such claims remain in the realm of personal testimony. But if we look at them collectively, rather than individually, an interesting pattern begins to emerge. Many of these stories, regardless of their accuracy, reflect a consistent perception that Area 51 is a place where the boundary of known technology is actively being explored, and where the public is only ever shown a portion of what exists. This perception is reinforced by the structure of classified work itself. In highly secure environments, information is compartmentalized, meaning that individuals often have access to only a small part of a larger project. This can lead to situations where even those inside the system do not fully understand what they are seeing or how it fits into the broader context. A technician working on one component of a system might not know its ultimate purpose. An engineer testing a specific feature might not be aware of how it integrates with other technologies. In such an environment, it is possible for incomplete information to be interpreted in ways that feel significant or even extraordinary, especially when combined with the knowledge that the work is classified. The mainstream explanation would suggest that many unusual claims can be understood within this framework of partial knowledge and misinterpretation. The alternative perspective acknowledges that possibility, while also recognizing that compartmentalization makes it inherently difficult to construct a complete picture from any single viewpoint. There is also the question of motivation, which adds another layer of complexity. Why do individuals come forward with these stories? In some cases, it may be a desire for recognition. In others, a genuine belief in what they experienced. And in still others, a mix of both. Human psychology is rarely simple, and the act of recounting a secretive experience can be influenced by many factors, including memory reconstruction, external feedback, and the passage of time. The mainstream approach emphasizes these factors as reasons to approach such accounts with skepticism. But the alternative perspective invites us to consider that even if specific details are inaccurate, the broader impulse to speak about hidden work may still reflect something real. The existence of environments where knowledge is restricted, where individuals are aware that they are part of something larger, and where the full scope of that something is not accessible to them. As we sit with these stories, it becomes clear that they are not definitive answers, but neither are they entirely irrelevant. They are part of the ecosystem that surrounds Area 51, shaped by the same forces of secrecy, perception, and incomplete information that define the base itself. The challenge is not to accept them uncritically or to dismiss them entirely, but to place them in context, to understand how they arise, and to recognize what they reveal about the relationship between hidden systems and public imagination. In a sense, these accounts function like reflections in a distorted mirror. They may not show us the exact reality of what exists behind the fence line, but they do show us how that reality is perceived, interpreted, and reimagined by those who attempt to describe it. And perhaps that is the most grounded way to approach this part of the story. Not by asking whether every claim is true or false, but by asking what these claims tell us about the environment in which they were formed. Area 51, by design, limits direct knowledge. In that absence, narratives will always emerge, some closer to reality, others further away, all shaped by the same underlying conditions. As we continue, we will begin to explore how these narratives intersect with official disclosures, declassified documents, and the gradual release of information over time, looking for patterns not just in what has been said, but in what has been revealed and what remains consistently just out of reach. As we continue forward, the focus shifts again, this time towards something quieter but, in many ways, more revealing than any single testimony or sighting: the slow, controlled release of information over time. Because if Area 51 is defined by secrecy, then the moments when that secrecy is partially lifted become especially important. They act like small openings in an otherwise sealed system, offering glimpses not just of what was hidden, but of how information itself is managed, filtered, and revealed. And when we examine those moments carefully, a pattern begins to emerge that is less about dramatic revelations and more about timing, context, and control. For decades, the existence of Area 51 was not officially acknowledged by the US government, even though it was widely discussed in public and referenced in various indirect ways. This created a peculiar situation where a place could be both widely known and officially unconfirmed at the same time. It wasn't until 2013, through the release of declassified documents related to the CIA's U2 program, that the name Area 51 appeared in an official context in a way that removed any remaining ambiguity. The mainstream interpretation of this event is straightforward. Historical records were declassified as part of a routine process, confirming what had already been understood by researchers and observers. But if we look at it more closely, the timing itself becomes interesting. Why did it take so long for something so widely known to be formally acknowledged? And what does that delay tell us about how sensitive information is handled? One possible explanation is purely procedural. Classified programs often remain protected long after their operational relevance has diminished, not because they are still active, but because the methods, technologies, or strategic insights associated with them may still have value. From this perspective, the delay in acknowledging Area 51 is simply a reflection of standard security practices. But there is another layer to consider, one that has less to do with the specific content of the information and more to do with the principle of control. By delaying acknowledgement, institutions retain the ability to shape the narrative when disclosure finally occurs. They can provide context, frame the significance, and guide interpretation in ways that would not be possible if information were released in real time. When the documents were finally made public, they confirmed key aspects of the mainstream story: that Area 51 was used for testing advanced reconnaissance aircraft, including the Lockheed U-2 and the Lockheed A-12 Oxcart. They also acknowledged that many UFO sightings during the 1950s and 1960s could be attributed to these high-altitude flights. On the surface, this seems to resolve a significant portion of the mystery. But what it also does, perhaps unintentionally, is reinforce the idea that public understanding of events can lag far behind reality. For years, people reported seeing objects they could not explain. For years, official explanations either dismissed or reinterpreted those sightings without revealing their true source. And then, decades later, the connection was made explicit. This sequence, event, uncertainty, partial explanation, delayed confirmation, becomes a recurring pattern, one that invites a deeper question. If this has happened before, could it be happening again in other areas that have not yet been declassified? This is where the conversation becomes less about specific secrets and more about the structure of secrecy itself. Area 51 is not unique because it hides information. Many classified facilities do that. What makes it unique is how visible its invisibility has become. It is a place that people know exists, know is important, and know is secret, but do not fully understand. And when information about such a place is released, it does not simply fill in gaps. It often creates new ones. Each disclosure answers certain questions while raising others, not necessarily because something is being intentionally withheld in that moment, but because the process of declassification is inherently selective. Information is reviewed, redacted, contextualized, and sometimes summarized, meaning that what reaches the public is not a complete record, but a curated version of one. From the mainstream perspective, this curation is necessary. It protects sensitive details, prevents the exposure of still relevant capabilities, and ensures that national security is not compromised. And again, this reasoning is grounded and consistent with how classified systems operate. But the alternative perspective does not need to reject that logic in order to ask a different kind of question. If the release of information is always partial, always shaped by considerations beyond simple transparency, then how should we interpret what we are given? Not as false, but as incomplete. Not as misleading, but as bounded by constraints that are not always visible to the public. This idea becomes even more interesting when we consider the broader timeline of technological development. The aircraft that were once tested at Area 51 and kept secret for years are now part of aviation history, studied, documented, and in some cases displayed in museums. But at the time of their development, they represented the cutting edge of what was possible, operating at levels that would have seemed almost speculative to those outside the program. If we apply that pattern forward, it suggests that there may always be a layer of technology that exists just beyond public awareness, not necessarily at Area 51 specifically, but within the broader network of classified research and development. And if that is the case, then the gap between what is known and what is possible is not a fixed boundary, but a moving one. What Area 51 teaches us, in a grounded and observable way, is that this gap has existed before, and that it can persist for long periods of time. It does not require us to assume anything extraordinary beyond human capability. It simply requires us to recognize that technological progress, especially when tied to national security, does not unfold entirely in the open. And when that progress intersects with public observation, whether through sightings, sounds, or indirect evidence, it can create moments where reality appears to outpace explanation. As we sit with this, the story becomes less about uncovering a hidden truth and more about understanding a process in which information is generated, restricted, and eventually released, each stage shaping how it is perceived. Area 51 is one example of this process, but it is also a lens through which we can examine it more broadly. The mainstream explanation gives us a clear and well-supported account of what has been revealed so far. The alternative perspective encourages us to remain aware of what that account does not include, not as a source of suspicion, but as a natural consequence of how secrecy operates. And perhaps that is where the calm curiosity of this exploration finds its balance. Not in trying to force a conclusion, but in recognizing that knowledge, especially in contexts like this, is always evolving. What is hidden today may be explained tomorrow, just as what was once unexplained has now been clarified. But the pattern itself, the delay, the partial view, the gradual unveiling, remains consistent. And as long as that pattern continues, places like Area 51 will continue to occupy that quiet space between fact and unknown, where the most grounded question is not, what are they hiding, but how much of the story are we able to see, and how much still lies just beyond the moment of disclosure. As we continue, the story begins to widen, moving beyond the physical boundaries of Area 51 and into something less tangible but equally influential: the way the base has evolved into a symbol. Because at a certain point, Area 51 stopped being just a location on a map and became something else entirely, something cultural, something psychological, almost like a shared reference point for the idea that there are places where knowledge is deliberately kept out of reach. And this transformation did not happen overnight. It emerged gradually, shaped by decades of silence, partial disclosures, sightings, and stories, until the name itself began to carry meaning far beyond its geographic coordinates. In the mainstream sense, Area 51 remains what it has always been: a highly classified test and training facility within the Nevada Test and Training Range, used for the development and evaluation of advanced military technologies. That explanation is supported by declassified documents, historical records, and the eventual acknowledgement of programs like the U-2 and A-12. But the alternative perspective does not necessarily challenge those facts. Instead, it focuses on how those facts coexist with a parallel narrative, one that has been built through media, public imagination, and the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with interpretation. Films, documentaries, books, and even casual conversations have all contributed to this process, turning Area 51 into a kind of shorthand for secrecy itself. When people reference it, they are often not just talking about a base in Nevada, but about the broader concept of hidden knowledge. What is interesting is how this symbolic identity feeds back into the way the base is perceived. Once a place becomes associated with mystery, every new piece of information, no matter how grounded, is filtered through that lens. A newly revealed aircraft program is not just a technological achievement, it becomes another layer in an ongoing story of concealment. A declassified document is not just historical data, it becomes evidence that more may still be hidden. This does not mean that the mainstream explanation is incorrect. It means that the context in which it is received has changed. The same facts can be interpreted in different ways, depending on the narrative framework surrounding them. And in the case of Area 51, that framework has been shaped by decades of ambiguity. There is also a feedback loop at work here, one that is subtle but powerful. The more a place is associated with secrecy, the more attention it attracts. The more attention it attracts, the more stories are generated about it. And the more stories are generated, the stronger its symbolic identity becomes. This loop does not require any new secrets to function. It can sustain itself through perception alone, reinforced by occasional real-world developments that align with the existing narrative. For example, when the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk was finally revealed to the public, it confirmed that highly unconventional aircraft had indeed been developed in secrecy. This validation of past speculation, even in a limited sense, strengthens the idea that speculation itself may sometimes be justified. Not in every detail, but in its underlying premise that not everything is immediately disclosed. At the same time, it is important to recognize that symbolism can distort as well as illuminate. When a place like Area 51 becomes a cultural icon, it can attract interpretations that extend far beyond what the available evidence supports. Extraterrestrial narratives, hidden civilizations, advanced technologies far beyond current understanding. These ideas become attached to the location not because they are proven, but because the environment of secrecy makes them difficult to disprove in a definitive way. The mainstream approach emphasizes this point, reminding us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that to date, no verifiable proof has emerged to support the more extreme interpretations. The alternative perspective does not necessarily dispute that standard, but it suggests that the persistence of such ideas is itself worth examining. Why do certain possibilities remain compelling, even in the absence of evidence? What role does uncertainty play in sustaining them? Part of the answer may lie in the way humans relate to the unknown. When information is incomplete, the mind does not simply stop. It continues to search for patterns, to construct explanations, to explore possibilities. This is not a flaw. It is a fundamental aspect of how we understand the world. In most situations, this process leads to increasingly accurate models as more data becomes available. But in environments where data is intentionally limited, the process can take on a different character. Without new information to refine or correct interpretations, multiple narratives can coexist indefinitely, each supported by its own internal logic and reinforced by selective evidence. Area 51 exists within exactly this kind of environment. It provides just enough confirmed information to establish its significance, but not enough to fully define its scope. This creates a space where imagination and analysis overlap, where grounded speculation can exist alongside more extreme ideas, and where the boundary between what is known and what is possible remains fluid. The challenge, as always, is to navigate that space carefully, to remain curious without becoming uncritical, and to recognize the difference between what can be supported by evidence and what remains in the realm of possibility. There is also a quieter aspect to this transformation, one that is less about public narratives and more about perception over time. For those who have followed the story of Area 51 across decades, there is a sense of gradual revelation, of watching something move from complete denial to partial acknowledgement to historical documentation. This progression creates its own kind of expectation, a sense that what is hidden now may eventually become known, just as previous secrets have been revealed. It is a reasonable expectation, grounded in observable patterns. But it also introduces a subtle bias, a tendency to assume that all unknowns will follow the same trajectory, that every mystery will eventually be explained in familiar terms. And this is where the story becomes more reflective. Because while some aspects of Area 51 have been clarified, others remain open, not necessarily because they are extraordinary, but because they are part of ongoing processes that have not yet reached a point of disclosure. The base continues to operate, continues to serve as a site for testing and development, and continues to exist within a framework of secrecy that is unlikely to disappear entirely. This means that the balance between known and unknown is not static. It shifts over time, influenced by technological progress, policy decisions, and the gradual release of information. So as we sit with this idea, Area 51 becomes something more than a collection of facts or theories. It becomes a case study in how knowledge is shaped, how perception evolves, and how the unknown is experienced in a world where not everything is meant to be seen at once. The mainstream explanation anchors us, providing a solid foundation of documented history and technological context. The alternative perspective keeps us attentive to the edges of that foundation, to the places where information is still incomplete, where patterns suggest more than they confirm, and where the story continues to unfold quietly beyond the limits of what is publicly visible. And perhaps that is the most fitting way to understand Area 51 as we move forward, not as a single mystery to be solved, but as an ongoing interaction between reality and perception, between what is revealed and what remains withheld. A place that is both real and symbolic, grounded and uncertain, known and not fully known at the same time. In the next part, we will begin to look more closely at the technological frontier itself, exploring how the development of experimental systems, whether aircraft, propulsion concepts, or surveillance technologies, continues to shape the boundaries of what is visible and what remains just out of sight. As we move deeper into this quiet examination, the focus naturally shifts toward the technological frontier itself, Because at the core of Area 51's story is not just secrecy, but innovation. Specifically, the kind of innovation that exists ahead of public awareness. And to understand why this matters, we need to slow down and consider what it actually means for technology to exist in that space, in that gap between development and disclosure. It is easy to think of progress as something linear and visible, when new inventions are announced, tested, and gradually adopted. But in the context of national security, that process often unfolds very differently. Entire systems can be conceived, built, and refined in environments where visibility is not just limited, but intentionally restricted, meaning that by the time the public becomes aware of a technology, it may already be years, or even decades, beyond its earliest forms. The mainstream explanation of Area 51 fits neatly into this framework. It has historically been used to test experimental aircraft, many of which introduced capabilities that were far beyond what was publicly known at the time. The Lockheed U-2 allowed surveillance at altitudes that were once considered unreachable. The Lockheed A-12 Oxcart pushed speed and altitude into new territory, redefining what was possible in reconnaissance missions. Later, the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk demonstrated that aircraft could be designed not just to fly, but to evade detection in ways that fundamentally altered radar technology and military strategy. Each of these developments, when viewed in hindsight, appears as a logical step in technological evolution. But at the time of their creation, they represented something closer to a leap, a sudden expansion of capability that was not visible to those outside the programs. This is where the story becomes more subtle, because when technology advances in secrecy, it creates a kind of temporal distortion in public perception. Observers encounter effects, unusual flight patterns, unexpected performance characteristics, unfamiliar shapes, before they have access to the causes. This reverses the normal order of understanding. Instead of seeing a new technology introduced and then observing its behavior, people observe the behavior first and are left to infer the technology behind it. And in that space of inference, interpretations can vary widely. The mainstream approach seeks to reconcile those observations with known or eventually revealed systems, grounding them in physics, engineering, and documented programs. The alternative perspective does not reject that reconciliation, but it remains aware that at any given moment, there may be technologies in development that have not yet entered the public domain. One area where this becomes particularly interesting is in the concept of propulsion. Conventional aircraft rely on well-understood principles: jet engines, aerodynamic lift, controlled thrust. But as research progresses, especially in classified environments, the boundaries of these principles are constantly being tested. Hypersonic flight, for example, introduces conditions where air behaves differently, where heat and pressure reach extreme levels, and where new materials and designs are required to maintain stability. While much of this research is publicly acknowledged in general terms, the specifics, how far these technologies have advanced, what prototypes may exist, what limitations have been overcome, are not always fully disclosed. This creates a situation where the known trajectory of development suggests certain possibilities, but the exact state of those possibilities remains uncertain. From a grounded perspective, this does not imply anything beyond human engineering. It simply reflects the fact that technological progress, especially in defense contexts, is often unevenly distributed between what is known and what is classified. But when we connect this idea back to Area 51, it raises an interesting question. If the base has historically been a site where such advancements are tested before public acknowledgement, then how do we interpret reports or observations that seem to exceed current public understanding? The mainstream answer would be cautious, suggesting that most such observations can be explained through known or eventually revealed technologies, combined with the limitations of human perception. And again, this answer is supported by historical precedent. But the alternative perspective remains open to the possibility that some observations may correspond to systems that are still in that pre-disclosure phase, existing but not yet acknowledged. There is also the question of how technology is tested, not just in terms of performance, but in terms of interaction with detection systems. Modern aircraft are not designed solely to move through space. They are designed to be seen or not seen in very specific ways. Radar cross-section, infrared signatures, electronic emissions, all of these factors are carefully managed. This means that an aircraft can be engineered to appear differently depending on the sensors used to observe it. To a radar system, it might seem almost invisible. To the human eye, it might present an unusual shape or reflect light in unexpected ways. To infrared detection, it might produce a signature that does not align with conventional expectations. When such systems are tested, especially in environments like the Nevada desert, they can produce observations that feel inconsistent or even contradictory, depending on how they are perceived. This brings us back to a recurring theme in the story of Area 51, the interaction between advanced technology and limited information. When observers encounter something that does not fit their existing framework, the natural response is to question that framework. Sometimes the answer lies in expanding it to include new but still conventional technologies. Other times, the lack of immediate explanation can lead to more speculative interpretations. The key is not to dismiss either response outright, but to understand the conditions under which they arise. In a fully transparent environment, unusual observations can be quickly contextualized and explained. In a restricted environment, they remain open, sometimes indefinitely, to interpretation. What makes Area 51 particularly compelling in this regard is that it has consistently operated at the edge of this dynamic. It is not just a place where technology is developed, but a place where the timing of that development relative to public awareness creates a persistent gap. And within that gap, the boundary between what is known and what is possible becomes less clearly defined. The mainstream explanation provides a strong anchor, reminding us that past mysteries have often resolved into understandable technologies once sufficient information became available. The alternative perspective encourages us to remain attentive to the present moment, to recognize that the same process may still be unfolding, even if we cannot yet see its full shape. So as we sit with this idea, the story of Area 51 becomes less about any single breakthrough and more about the nature of innovation itself, especially when it is hidden. It is about how new capabilities emerge, how they are tested in isolation, and how they eventually enter the broader world, often long after their initial development. It is about the quiet interval between creation and revelation, a period where effects can be observed without clear causes and where understanding lags behind reality. And perhaps that is where the calm curiosity of this exploration finds its next step. Not in trying to identify specific technologies that may or may not exist, but in understanding the conditions that allow such technologies to remain unseen. Because once we understand those conditions, the mystery of Area 51 becomes less about what is hidden and more about how hidden things can exist in the first place, quietly shaping the edges of what we think we know. In the next part, we will begin to explore how surveillance, tracking, and observation systems themselves play a role in this story, and how the act of watching, whether by governments or individuals, interacts with the act of concealing. As we continue, the direction of the story turns inward, towards something that is easy to overlook, but central to everything we've explored so far, the act of observation itself. Because Area 51 is not only a place where things are hidden, it is also a place that has been watched, studied, monitored, and speculated about from a distance for decades. And when you think about it carefully, this creates a quiet tension between two opposing forces, the effort to conceal and the effort to observe. One side builds systems designed to avoid detection, to minimize visibility, to control information. The other side, whether it is governments, independent researchers, or ordinary individuals, attempts to gather fragments, to piece together patterns, to understand what lies beyond the boundary. And somewhere in between those two forces, the story of Area 51 continues to unfold. From the mainstream perspective, surveillance and observation are fundamental to national security. The same systems that are used to test aircraft at places like Area 51 are also used to monitor airspace, track potential threats, and maintain awareness of global activity. Radar networks, satellite systems, and advanced sensor arrays form a layered structure of observation that extends far beyond any single location. Within this framework, Area 51 is not an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader ecosystem where detection and evasion evolve together. As one side develops more advanced ways to observe, the other develops more advanced ways to remain unseen. This is a continuous process, driven by competition, strategy, and the need to maintain advantage. But what becomes interesting is how this process appears from the outside. For observers who are not part of these systems, the act of watching is often indirect, relying on visible clues, public records, and occasional anomalies. Over the years, enthusiasts and researchers have attempted to monitor activity around Area 51, using everything from telescopes positioned on distant hills to radio scanners and satellite imagery. While much of this observation is limited in scope, it reflects a persistent effort to reduce uncertainty, to transform a hidden environment into something that can at least be partially understood. And sometimes, these efforts do produce results. Images of unusual aircraft shapes, patterns of movement, changes in infrastructure. The mainstream explanation would interpret these findings as evidence of ongoing testing and development, consistent with the known purpose of the facility. But the alternative perspective might ask whether these glimpses, incomplete as they are, hint at activities that have not yet been publicly contextualized. There is also a deeper layer to consider, one that moves beyond physical observation and into the realm of data. In the modern world, surveillance is not limited to what can be seen with the eye. It includes electronic signals, communication patterns, thermal signatures, and a wide range of measurable phenomena that can be collected and analyzed. This means that even in a place designed to minimize visibility, complete invisibility is difficult to achieve. Every system, no matter how advanced, interacts with its environment in some way, producing signals that can, in theory, be detected under the right conditions. The challenge is that access to such detection capabilities is not evenly distributed. Governments and specialized organizations possess tools that are far beyond what is available to the public, creating an asymmetry in how information is gathered and interpreted. This asymmetry leads to an interesting dynamic. Those with the most advanced observational tools are often the least able to share what they see due to classification and security concerns. Those with the least advanced tools are often the most open in discussing their observations, but their data is limited and sometimes ambiguous. As a result, the public narrative is shaped by fragments, partial observations interpreted through incomplete frameworks, occasionally intersecting with official disclosures that arrive much later. The mainstream approach views this as an inevitable consequence of maintaining security while operating in a world where observation is always possible. The alternative perspective sees it as a source of ongoing uncertainty, where the full picture is distributed unevenly across different layers of access. When we bring this back to Area 51, the pattern becomes clearer. The base exists within a network of observation and counter-observation, where its activities are both hidden and, in subtle ways, detectable. Aircraft may be designed to reduce radar visibility, but not necessarily to eliminate all forms of detection. Test flights may occur in restricted airspace, but their effects, sound, light, motion, can still extend beyond those boundaries. Infrastructure may be concealed, but changes over time can be observed through satellite imagery. Each of these elements contributes to a kind of partial transparency, where the existence of activity is evident, but its full nature remains obscured. This partial transparency is what sustains much of the intrigue surrounding Area 51. It provides just enough information to confirm that something is happening, but not enough to fully explain it. And in that space, interpretation becomes an active process. Observers compare notes, analyze patterns, and attempt to construct coherent narratives from incomplete data. Sometimes, these narratives align closely with what is later confirmed through official channels. Other times, they diverge, influenced by assumptions or extrapolations that extend beyond the available evidence. The key point is that both outcomes are shaped by the same underlying condition: the gap between observation and explanation. There is also a philosophical dimension to this, one that becomes more apparent the longer we sit with it. Observation is often associated with understanding, with the idea that to see something clearly is to know it. But in environments like Area 51, observation does not always lead directly to understanding. It can reveal patterns without context, effects without causes, signals without clear interpretation. This challenges the assumption that visibility and knowledge are always aligned. In some cases, seeing more can actually introduce new questions, expanding the boundary of what is unknown rather than reducing it. And perhaps that is one of the most subtle aspects of this entire story. Area 51 is not just a place that resists observation. It is a place that reshapes what observation means. It reminds us that there are limits to what can be inferred from incomplete data, that patterns can suggest without confirming, and that the act of watching, while powerful, is not always sufficient to reveal the full structure of what is being observed. The mainstream explanation grounds us in the reality of surveillance systems, technological development, and strategic concealment. The alternative perspective invites us to remain aware of the spaces in between, where observation and understanding do not perfectly overlap. As we move forward, this idea will continue to unfold, especially as we begin to explore how Area 51 fits into a larger global context, where other facilities, other programs, and other layers of secrecy interact in ways that are not always visible from a single point of view. Because while Area 51 is often treated as unique, it is also part of a broader pattern, one that extends beyond any single location and into the wider structure of how advanced technologies are developed, tested, and protected. And in that wider context, the questions we have been asking begin to take on a slightly different shape, less focused on one place and more focused on the system as a whole. As we continue, the perspective widens further, moving beyond Area 51 as a single location and into the broader system it belongs to. Because one of the most grounded yet often overlooked realities is that Area 51 is not unique in its function. It is simply the most visible example of something that exists in many forms across the world. Highly restricted environments where advanced technologies are developed, tested, and evaluated away from public awareness. When we begin to look at it this way, the mystery shifts slightly. It becomes less about one base in the Nevada desert and more about a global pattern of controlled innovation, where secrecy is not an exception, but a standard operating condition. From the mainstream perspective, this pattern is well understood. Nations invest heavily in research and development, particularly in areas related to defense, surveillance, and aerospace. Facilities are established in remote or secured locations to minimize risk, protect sensitive information, and allow for experimentation without interference. In the United States, Area 51 operates within the larger Nevada Test and Training Range. which itself is part of an extensive network of military installations. Similarly, other countries maintain their own classified sites, though they may not be as publicly recognized or culturally embedded as Area 51. The existence of such facilities is not controversial in itself. It is a practical necessity within the framework of national security. But what becomes interesting is how visibility differs between them. Area 51, despite its secrecy, has become widely known, discussed, and symbolized. Other facilities, performing similar or even more advanced work, may remain almost entirely outside public awareness. This creates an imbalance in perception. When people think about hidden technologies, they often focus on Area 51, not because it is necessarily the only or even the most active site, but because it has become the focal point of the narrative. The alternative perspective invites us to step back and consider whether this focus might be somewhat misleading. If secrecy is a distributed system, spread across multiple locations and programs, then concentrating too heavily on one site could obscure the broader picture. There is also a structural aspect to this system that is worth examining. Advanced technological development, especially in classified environments, tends to be compartmentalized not just within a single facility, but across multiple facilities. Different aspects of a project, design, testing, analysis, integration, may occur in separate locations, each with its own level of security and specialization. This means that no single site necessarily contains the entirety of a program. Area 51, for example, has historically been associated with flight testing, but the design and engineering of the aircraft tested there often took place elsewhere, within organizations like Lockheed Skunk Works. This distributed approach enhances security by ensuring that sensitive information is not concentrated in one place, but it also makes it more difficult to form a complete picture from any single vantage point. From a grounded perspective, this explains why Area 51, despite its reputation, may not hold all the answers people associate with it. It is a node within a larger network, a place where certain phases of development occur, but not necessarily the origin or the entirety of what is being developed. The mainstream explanation emphasizes this point, suggesting that while Area 51 has played a significant role in testing advanced aircraft, it is part of a broader ecosystem that includes laboratories, manufacturing facilities, and other test ranges. The alternative perspective builds on this by asking how much of that ecosystem remains outside public awareness, and how the distribution of information across multiple sites contributes to the overall sense of mystery. There is also a temporal dimension to consider. Technologies do not remain static, and neither do the facilities that support them. What was cutting edge at Area 51 in the 1950s or 1960s may now be outdated, replaced by newer systems developed in different locations or under different programs. This means that the significance of any single site can change over time, even as its reputation persists. Area 51 may still be active, still involved in testing and development, but it is unlikely to be the sole center of innovation it is sometimes imagined to be. Instead, it is part of an evolving landscape where new technologies emerge, are tested, and eventually transition into broader use or into the historical record. This evolving landscape also affects how we interpret the unknown. When unusual observations occur, whether they are sightings, sounds, or data anomalies, the instinct is often to connect them to a known focal point, like Area 51. But if the system is distributed, those observations could originate from multiple sources, not all of which are publicly recognized. The mainstream approach would caution against making direct connections without evidence, emphasizing the complexity of the broader system. The alternative perspective encourages a wider lens, one that considers the possibility that what we observe may be part of a network of activities, rather than a single centralized operation. As we sit with this idea, the story becomes less about uncovering a hidden truth at a specific location and more about understanding how secrecy operates at scale. It is not just about what is hidden, but about how it is organized, how it is distributed, and how it is revealed over time. Area 51 remains an important piece of this puzzle, both historically and symbolically, but it is only one piece. The larger picture includes multiple sites, multiple programs, and multiple layers of classification, all interacting in ways that are not always visible from the outside. And this brings us back to a familiar balance. The mainstream explanation provides a coherent framework for understanding how and why such systems exist, grounded in practical considerations of security and technological development. The alternative perspective does not reject that framework, but it extends it, asking how the structure of that system influences what we are able to know and what remains beyond our current view. It suggests that the mystery of Area 51 is not isolated, but connected to a broader pattern, one that continues to evolve as technology advances and as the boundaries between secrecy and disclosure shift. As we continue, we will begin to explore how this system interacts with modern developments, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and next-generation surveillance, looking at how the principles we have discussed might apply to technologies that are only just beginning to enter public awareness. Because if the past has shown us anything, it is that the gap between what is known and what is possible is always moving, and that places like Area 51 are just one expression of that ongoing process. As we move further into this exploration, the timeline begins to shift toward the present, and with it, the nature of what we consider advanced begins to change. Because while Area 51 has long been associated with aircraft, fast, high, and difficult to detect, the frontier of technology today is expanding into domains that are less visible, less tangible, and in some ways, even more difficult to interpret from the outside. Artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, advanced sensor fusion, and electronic warfare are no longer abstract concepts. They are active areas of development, shaping how systems operate, how decisions are made, and how environments are perceived. And if we consider Area 51 not just as a place, but as part of a system designed to test and refine emerging capabilities, then it becomes reasonable to ask how these newer forms of technology might fit into that system. The mainstream perspective offers a grounded starting point. Military and defense research has increasingly focused on integrating artificial intelligence into a wide range of applications, from data analysis to autonomous navigation. Aircraft, for example, are no longer defined solely by their physical characteristics, but by the systems that control them, assist pilots, or even operate independently under certain conditions. Drones and unmanned aerial vehicles have already demonstrated how effective autonomous systems can be, and ongoing research continues to push these capabilities further. From this standpoint, facilities like Area 51, or others within the same network, may be involved in testing not just how machines move through the air, but how they think, respond, and adapt in complex environments. But what makes this more interesting is how these technologies interact with perception. Unlike traditional aircraft, which can be observed directly, many of these newer systems operate in ways that are not immediately visible. Artificial intelligence, for example, does not have a physical form that can be seen in the sky. It exists within software, within decision-making processes, within the interpretation of data. When combined with advanced hardware, however, it can produce behaviors that appear unusual or difficult to predict. An autonomous system might maneuver in ways that do not align with human intuition. A sensor-driven platform might respond to inputs that are not visible to the human eye. From the outside, these behaviors could appear irregular, even mysterious, especially if they are observed without context. This brings us back to a familiar pattern. one that has repeated throughout the history of Area 51. New technologies emerge, they are tested in controlled and often hidden environments, and their effects are occasionally observed before they are fully understood. In the past, this pattern involved high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, or stealth designs. Today, it may involve systems that are less about physical visibility and more about information processing, coordination, and adaptability. The mainstream explanation would emphasize continuity, suggesting that this is simply the next phase of technological evolution, consistent with the progression from earlier aerospace developments. And that is a reasonable conclusion. But the alternative perspective invites us to consider how this shift changes the nature of what can be observed and how it is interpreted. For example, if an advanced autonomous aircraft were being tested, one capable of rapid, non-linear maneuvers, guided by AI-driven decision-making, it might exhibit flight patterns that differ from those of traditional piloted aircraft. To an observer, such movements could appear erratic or unconventional, not because they defy physics, but because they are not constrained by the same human limitations or expectations. Similarly, systems designed to integrate multiple sensor inputs could respond to stimuli that are not visible or audible, creating behaviors that seem disconnected from the observable environment. In a context where information about these systems is restricted, such observations could easily be misinterpreted, just as earlier generations of experimental aircraft were. There is also the question of how these technologies are tested in relation to surveillance and detection. Modern systems are not only designed to perform tasks, but to operate within complex networks of observation, where they must interact with radar, satellites, electronic signals, and other forms of monitoring. This means that testing environments must account for a wide range of variables, including how a system appears, or does not appear, to different types of sensors. Facilities like Area 51, with their controlled airspace and specialized infrastructure, are well suited for this kind of work. But again, the specifics of what is being tested, how far it has progressed, and what limitations have been overcome are not always publicly disclosed. From a grounded perspective, this is simply how classified research operates. Information is shared selectively, often long after the fact, and only to the extent that it does not compromise ongoing capabilities. But when we place this within the broader pattern we have been exploring, it raises a subtle but important question. If previous generations of technology created observable effects that were not immediately understood, and if those effects were later explained through declassification, then what might the current generation of technology look like from the outside? Not in terms of extraordinary claims, but in terms of the same pattern repeating under new conditions. There is also a philosophical dimension to this shift, one that becomes more apparent as technology moves further into the realm of information and autonomy. When machines begin to make decisions, even within constrained parameters, the line between predictable behavior and adaptive response becomes less clear. This does not imply anything beyond human design, but it does introduce a level of complexity that can be difficult to interpret without detailed knowledge of the system. In a classified environment where that knowledge is not accessible, the behavior of such systems may appear opaque, even to trained observers. So as we sit with this, the story of Area 51 continues to evolve, not as a static mystery, but as a reflection of changing technological landscapes. The base, or the network it is part of, may still test aircraft, but those aircraft are now embedded within systems that extend beyond physical design into software, data, and decision-making processes. The mainstream explanation provides a stable foundation, framing these developments as part of a continuous progression in military and aerospace technology. The alternative perspective encourages us to remain attentive to how these developments might appear from the outside, how they might generate new forms of uncertainty, and how the gap between observation and understanding may persist, even as the nature of what is being observed changes. And perhaps that is the most grounded way to approach this next phase of the story. Not by assuming that something fundamentally different is happening, but by recognizing that the same dynamics, innovation, secrecy, perception, are now operating in a more complex environment. The unknown has not disappeared. It has simply shifted, becoming less about what can be seen and more about what can be inferred. In the next part, we will begin to explore how these ideas intersect with public awareness in the modern era, particularly through the lens of recent discussions around unidentified aerial phenomena and how official language itself has begun to change. As we continue, the story returns to something that feels both familiar and slightly different at the same time: the modern conversation around unidentified aerial phenomena, or what is now often referred to using a more neutral and structured term. Because in recent years, there has been a subtle but noticeable shift in how governments, particularly in the United States, discuss objects or events in the sky that are not immediately identified. This shift does not confirm anything extraordinary, but it does change the tone of the conversation, moving it away from dismissal and toward a more measured acknowledgement that some observations remain unresolved within the available data. From the mainstream perspective, this change is largely procedural and analytical. Advances in sensor technology, radar systems, and data collection have increased the volume and complexity of observations. Military pilots, for example, now operate with equipment that can detect and record phenomena in ways that were not possible in earlier decades. This has led to a greater emphasis on cataloging, analyzing, and understanding these observations, even when they do not immediately fit into known categories. Organizations like All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office have been established to study such cases systematically, with the goal of determining whether they represent new technologies, sensor errors, or other explainable factors. The official stance remains grounded. Most cases are expected to have conventional explanations, and there is no confirmed evidence of non-human technology. But what makes this development interesting is not just the conclusions, but the language itself. The shift from terms like UFO to more neutral classifications reflects an attempt to remove assumptions and focus on observable data. It acknowledges that the category of unknown can exist without immediately implying anything beyond human or natural phenomena. And yet, the very act of acknowledging that some cases remain unexplained introduces a familiar element into the modern conversation, one that echoes the earlier periods we have discussed. Once again, there are observations that do not fully align with existing frameworks, and once again, there is a gap between what is seen and what is understood. When we place this in the context of Area 51 and similar facilities, the pattern becomes more intriguing. Historically, as we have seen, some unexplained sightings were later attributed to classified technologies that had not yet been disclosed. The mainstream explanation would suggest that this pattern still applies, that many modern unidentified observations may eventually be explained through known or emerging technologies, combined with the complexities of sensor systems and environmental conditions. And this is a strong, evidence-based position, but the alternative perspective does not necessarily reject it. Instead, it asks whether the current moment might represent another instance of that same pattern, where observations precede explanation, and where the full context is not yet available to the public. One of the key differences today, however, is the level of documentation. Modern systems can capture high-resolution video, radar data, infrared signatures, and other forms of information simultaneously. This creates a richer data set for analysis, but it also introduces new challenges. Data can be misinterpreted, sensors can produce artifacts, and complex environments can generate signals that are difficult to disentangle. The mainstream approach emphasizes these factors, suggesting that many unexplained cases may ultimately be resolved through improved analysis and a better understanding of how these systems interact. The alternative perspective acknowledges this, while also noting that increased data does not always lead to immediate clarity. In some cases, it can highlight complexities that were previously invisible, expanding the range of what is considered unknown. There is also the question of how these discussions are communicated to the public. In earlier decades, information about unexplained phenomena was often limited, filtered, or dismissed outright. Today, there is a greater degree of openness, at least in terms of acknowledging that certain observations are under investigation. This does not mean that all information is being shared, but it does represent a shift in approach. The existence of official reports, briefings, and statements creates a more structured framework for discussing these topics, one that is less reliant on speculation and more focused on analysis. And yet, even within this framework, there are limits to what can be disclosed, particularly when observations intersect with classified systems or sensitive capabilities. This brings us back to a recurring theme: the relationship between observation, explanation, and disclosure. Area 51, in its historical role, has shown us how this relationship can unfold over time, with observations occurring first, explanations emerging later, and full disclosure sometimes taking decades. The modern conversation around unidentified aerial phenomena appears to follow a similar structure, though with more advanced tools and a more open, if still limited, dialogue. The mainstream explanation provides a steady foundation, emphasizing that unknown does not mean unexplainable, only that explanation has not yet been achieved. The alternative perspective encourages us to remain attentive to how this process evolves, to how patterns from the past may inform the present, and to how the boundaries of knowledge continue to shift. There is also a deeper, more reflective aspect to this moment. The acknowledgement of unknowns, even in a limited sense, invites a different kind of curiosity. It suggests that despite advances in technology and analysis, there are still aspects of our environment that are not fully understood, at least not within the frameworks currently available to the public. This does not point to any specific conclusion, but it does reinforce the idea that knowledge is always in progress, that the line between known and unknown is not fixed, but constantly moving. So as we sit with this, the story of Area 51 connects quietly to the present, not as a direct explanation for modern observations, but as part of a larger pattern that continues to unfold. A pattern where technology advances, where observations sometimes outpace understanding, and where explanations emerge over time, shaped by both discovery and disclosure. The base itself remains in the background, a symbol of that process, while the conversation moves forward into new territory, guided by the same balance of skepticism and curiosity that has defined it from the beginning. And as we move into the next part, we will begin to slow the pace slightly, drawing together the patterns we have explored and reflecting on what they suggest about the nature of secrecy, perception, and the quiet persistence of the unknown in a world that is constantly trying to understand itself more clearly. As we begin to slow down and gather the threads of everything we've explored, something subtle starts to come into focus. Not a single answer, not a hidden revelation waiting to be uncovered, but a pattern. A pattern that runs quietly beneath the surface of Area 51's history, connecting aircraft, sightings, secrecy, human perception, and the slow release of information over time. And the more carefully we look at that pattern, the less it feels like a mystery in the dramatic sense, and the more it feels like a system, one that operates consistently, even as the details within it change. If we return to the beginning, to the earliest days of the Cold War, we can see how this system first took shape. A need emerges: surveillance, intelligence, technological advantage. A solution is developed: high-altitude reconnaissance, experimental aircraft, new materials. That solution is tested in secrecy, in places like Area 51, where observation can be controlled and information can be contained. But the testing does not occur in a vacuum. It produces effects, Objects in the sky, sounds across the desert, data on radar screens. Those effects are observed, often without context, and interpreted through the frameworks available at the time. And when those frameworks are insufficient, when the observation does not fit neatly into what is known, the result is uncertainty. This uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is, in many ways, a byproduct of how the system is designed to function. Secrecy requires that certain information be withheld, and when information is withheld, interpretation becomes necessary. People fill in gaps, not because they are trying to create mystery, but because the absence of explanation invites it. Over time, these interpretations accumulate, forming narratives that exist alongside the underlying reality, sometimes aligning with it, sometimes diverging from it, but always shaped by the same initial condition: incomplete information. The mainstream explanation of Area 51 fits cleanly into this pattern. It tells us that the base was used for testing advanced aircraft like the Lockheed U-2, the Lockheed A-12 Oxcart, and later stealth technologies. It explains that many unusual sightings can be attributed to these programs, combined with the limitations of human perception and the constraints of the time. And this explanation is supported by declassified documents, historical records, and technical analysis. It provides a solid, grounded framework that accounts for much of what has been observed. But what makes this framework more interesting, not less, is how it interacts with the alternative perspective. Because the alternative perspective, at its most grounded level, does not necessarily reject the mainstream explanation. Instead, it extends it, asking what the pattern itself implies. If secrecy has historically delayed understanding, if advanced technologies have repeatedly appeared unexplained until they were revealed, then it becomes reasonable to consider that this process is ongoing, not in a way that suggests extraordinary conclusions, but in a way that acknowledges the structure of how knowledge is managed. And this is where the story becomes quieter, more reflective. The question is no longer, what is hidden at Area 51, but how does hidden knowledge behave over time? What we see, again and again, is a cycle. Development occurs in isolation. Effects are observed externally. Interpretation fills the gap, and eventually, at some later point, information is released, reframing those earlier observations in a new light. The cycle does not eliminate mystery, it transforms it. What was once unknown becomes known, but the space of the unknown shifts forward, carried by new developments that are not yet disclosed. There is something almost calming about this realization, because it removes the need for extreme conclusions while preserving a sense of curiosity. It allows us to sit comfortably between certainty and speculation, recognizing that not everything needs to be fully explained in the present moment. Some things are simply part of a process that unfolds over time, revealing itself gradually, often in ways that only make sense in hindsight. Area 51, in this sense, is not just a place where secrets are kept. It is a place where time itself is structured differently, where the timeline of development and the timeline of public awareness do not align. What exists now may only be understood years from now, just as what was once hidden has now become part of documented history. This temporal gap is what creates the feeling of mystery, even when the underlying processes are entirely grounded in human activity. And when we consider this, the role of perception becomes even more important. Because perception operates in the present. It tries to make sense of what is happening now, using the information currently available. But if that information is incomplete, then perception will always be working with partial data. It will always be slightly out of sync with reality, not because it is flawed, but because it is operating within constraints. This is true not just for individuals, but for entire societies. Public understanding evolves as information becomes available, but it is always catching up, always adjusting to a reality that has already moved forward. So as we sit here, In this quiet moment of reflection, the story of Area 51 becomes less about uncovering something hidden behind a fence, and more about understanding how knowledge itself is revealed. It is about recognizing patterns, not just in what has been disclosed, but in how disclosure happens. It is about seeing the continuity between past and present, between the aircraft of the Cold War and the technologies of today, between the sightings that once seemed inexplicable and the explanations that later emerged. The mainstream perspective grounds us, giving us a clear and evidence-based understanding of what has been confirmed. The alternative perspective keeps us attentive, reminding us that confirmation often arrives later, and that the absence of explanation is not the same as the absence of cause. Together, they form a balanced way of thinking, one that neither dismisses uncertainty nor exaggerates it, but allows it to exist as part of a larger ongoing process. And perhaps that is the most meaningful way to approach Area 51 as we begin to draw these ideas together. Not as a mystery to be solved in a single moment, but as a lens through which we can observe how knowledge, secrecy, and perception interact over time. A place that teaches us less about what is hidden and more about how the hidden gradually becomes known. In the next part, we will begin to bring this exploration closer to its conclusion, reflecting on what this pattern suggests about the future and how the relationship between the known and the unknown may continue to evolve in the years ahead. As we begin to move toward the final stretch of this exploration, the perspective becomes even quieter, more reflective, because now the question is no longer about what Area 51 has been, but about what it represents going forward. Not just as a place, not just as a symbol, but as part of an ongoing relationship between technology, secrecy, and human understanding that does not end with any single disclosure. If anything, the history we've traced suggests that this relationship is continuous, always shifting, always evolving, just slightly ahead of what is publicly visible. If we look forward from a grounded standpoint, the trajectory seems clear in one sense. Technology will continue to advance, driven by the same forces that shaped the early days of Area 51: competition, security, and the pursuit of strategic advantage. New systems will be developed, tested, and refined in controlled environments. Some of these systems will eventually be revealed, becoming part of the public understanding of what is possible. Others may remain classified for longer periods, either because they are still operationally sensitive or because their capabilities intersect with areas that are not yet ready for disclosure. This is not speculation in the dramatic sense. It is simply an extension of a pattern that has already been observed. But what becomes more interesting is how the context around that pattern is changing. In earlier decades, information moved slowly. Sightings might be reported in newspapers, discussed in local communities, or analyzed through limited channels. Today, information moves almost instantly. Observations can be recorded, shared, and debated on a global scale within minutes. Satellite imagery is more accessible, data is more abundant, and communication is more immediate. This creates a different environment for secrecy, one where controlling information is more complex, and where the gap between observation and explanation may feel more visible, even if it still exists. The mainstream perspective would suggest that this increased visibility does not fundamentally alter the structure of secrecy, but it does change how it is experienced. Governments and organizations may adapt by refining how information is managed, by selectively releasing data, or by shaping narratives in more deliberate ways. The core principle remains the same: protect what must be protected, disclose what can be disclosed, and maintain a balance between transparency and security. The alternative perspective, however, invites us to consider how this balance might shift over time. If more data becomes available to the public, even indirectly, will that reduce uncertainty, or will it simply create new forms of ambiguity, where more information leads to more questions rather than fewer? There is also the question of how perception itself evolves in response to this environment. Earlier generations encountered the unknown in more isolated ways. An unusual light in the sky, a distant sound, a fragment of information. Today, those experiences are often shared, analyzed, and interpreted collectively. This can lead to faster clarification in some cases, but it can also amplify speculation in others. Patterns are identified more quickly, but so are anomalies. The line between explanation and uncertainty becomes more dynamic, constantly shifting as new data is introduced and interpreted. When we bring this back to Area 51, it suggests that the base's role as a focal point of mystery may continue, but in a slightly different form. It may no longer be the singular center of speculation it once was, simply because the landscape of information has expanded. Other facilities, other programs, and other technologies may share that space of attention. But the underlying dynamic, the interaction between hidden development and public observation, remains the same. Area 51 becomes less of an isolated phenomenon and more of a reference point, a way of understanding how this dynamic has operated in the past and how it might continue to operate in the future. There is also something worth noting about expectations. Over time, as more information about Area 51 has been revealed, some of the more extreme theories have lost their intensity, replaced by a more grounded understanding of what the base has historically been used for. But at the same time, the expectation that there must be more has not entirely disappeared. It has simply adapted, becoming less focused on specific claims and more focused on the general idea that not everything is immediately visible. This expectation is not necessarily irrational. It is a reflection of the pattern we have observed where disclosure lags behind development. But it also requires balance, an awareness that while there may be more to learn, that more is likely to be consistent with the processes we understand, rather than something entirely outside them. And perhaps that is where the calm, grounded curiosity of this exploration finds its most stable form. Not in trying to predict specific secrets or uncover hidden truths, but in recognizing the continuity of the system itself. Area 51 is part of a larger process, one that will continue regardless of how much is revealed or remains concealed. It is a process where innovation leads, secrecy follows, observation trails behind, and understanding gradually catches up. As we sit with this, the story becomes less about the unknown as something distant or unreachable, and more about the unknown as something temporary, something that exists within a timeline, waiting to be understood when the conditions allow. What is hidden today may be explained tomorrow, just as what was once unexplained has now become part of established knowledge. But the presence of the unknown itself does not disappear. It moves forward, always just beyond the edge of current understanding. So, as we prepare to move into the final parts of this journey, the focus shifts one last time, not outward, toward new details, but inward, toward the meaning of what we've explored. What does Area 51, as both a real place and a symbolic one, teach us about how we think, how we interpret, and how we relate to the boundaries of knowledge? That is the question we will carry into the next part, as we begin to gently bring this exploration to a close, not with a conclusion, but with a perspective that lingers, quiet and open-ended, like the desert itself. As we approach the end of this journey, the pace naturally slows, and what once felt like separate pieces, aircraft, sightings, secrecy, human stories, technology, begin to settle into a single, continuous picture. Not a picture that reveals a hidden answer, but one that quietly reshapes how we think about the question itself. Because in the end, Area 51 is not just about what exists behind a fence in the Nevada desert. It is about how we, as observers, relate to the idea that there are always things just beyond our current understanding, and how we choose to interpret that space between the known and the unknown. If we reflect on everything we've explored, a consistent theme emerges. The unknown is not empty. It is structured. It has causes, processes, and timelines, even when those are not immediately visible. The early sightings that puzzled observers were not random. Many were tied to real, advanced aircraft like the Lockheed U-2, operating in a context where their existence could not yet be acknowledged. The unusual shapes that seemed almost impossible were, in some cases, early glimpses of designs like the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, which only made sense once the underlying principles of stealth technology were revealed. The sounds, the patterns, the inconsistencies, all of them, when viewed through time, begin to align with processes that were always grounded in human engineering, even if they appeared mysterious in the moment. And yet, recognizing this does not remove the sense of intrigue. If anything, it refines it, because it shifts the focus away from dramatic possibilities and towards something more subtle, but perhaps more meaningful. It invites us to consider not just what is hidden, but how hidden things come to be understood. It shows us that mystery is not always a sign of something extraordinary, but often a sign of something incomplete, something that has not yet been fully revealed or contextualized. There is also something deeply human in this process. When we encounter the unknown, we do not remain passive. We interpret, we imagine, we construct explanations. Sometimes those explanations are grounded and cautious. Other times, they extend further, exploring possibilities that go beyond the available evidence. Both responses are part of how we engage with uncertainty. They reflect a natural desire to make sense of the world, to reduce ambiguity, to bring the unknown into a framework that feels coherent. But what Area 51 quietly teaches us is that this process is not always immediate. Understanding can take time. It can require patience, context, and the gradual release of information. The mainstream perspective, throughout all of this, has provided a steady anchor. It reminds us to rely on evidence, to prioritize documented history, and to approach extraordinary claims with careful scrutiny. It shows us that much of what once seemed inexplicable can be understood through the lens of technological development and strategic necessity. And this perspective is essential because it keeps us grounded, preventing us from drifting too far into speculation without support. At the same time, the alternative perspective plays an equally important role, not by contradicting the mainstream, but by complementing it. It encourages us to remain aware of the limits of current knowledge, to recognize that what is known today was once unknown, and that the process of discovery is ongoing. It does not demand that we believe in hidden truths beyond evidence, but it invites us to remain open to the idea that understanding evolves, that the boundaries of knowledge are not fixed. Together, these perspectives create a kind of balance, a way of thinking that is both stable and flexible. Stable enough to rely on evidence and reason, flexible enough to acknowledge uncertainty without being unsettled by it. And in that balance, the story of Area 51 finds its most meaningful form, not as a mystery to be solved, but as an example of how mystery itself functions, how it arises, how it persists, and how it gradually transforms into understanding. There is also a quiet shift that happens when we begin to see it this way. The focus moves away from the idea of uncovering a single hidden truth and toward a broader awareness of process. We begin to see that the unknown is not something separate from reality, but a part of it, a stage in the progression of knowledge. What feels mysterious today may become ordinary tomorrow, just as what once seemed extraordinary has become part of established history. And this progression does not diminish the experience of curiosity. It deepens it, because it shows us that there is always more to learn, always another layer to uncover, always another question waiting just beyond the edge of what we currently understand. So as we sit here, at the edge of this exploration, the image of Area 51 becomes almost symbolic in a different way. Not as a place hiding answers, but as a place reminding us that answers are not always immediate. That understanding is something that unfolds, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly, but always within a framework that connects what we see now to what we will eventually come to know. And perhaps that is the most calming thought to carry forward. That the unknown is not something to be feared or rushed to explain, but something to be observed, considered, and allowed to reveal itself in time. That curiosity does not require certainty to be meaningful, and that the quiet space between what is known and what is not empty, but full of possibility, waiting patiently to be understood. In the final part, we will bring this journey to a gentle close, not by resolving every question, but by stepping back and seeing the entire landscape as it is, wide, layered, and still quietly unfolding. And now, as we reach the final stretch of this journey, everything begins to settle into a kind of stillness, like the desert at night, where movement slows, sound fades, and what remains is not a conclusion, but a perspective. Because after everything we've explored, history, technology, perception, secrecy, and the quiet patterns connecting them, the story of Area 51 does not resolve into a single answer. Instead, it becomes something more subtle, something that lingers just beneath the surface of how we understand the world. If we step back and look at the full landscape, what stands out is not a hidden revelation waiting to be uncovered, but a process that has been quietly repeating itself for decades. Technologies are developed in isolation. Their effects are observed without context. Interpretations form in the space between observation and explanation. And over time, as information is gradually released, those interpretations shift, sometimes aligning with reality, sometimes dissolving into the background as understanding catches up. This cycle does not eliminate the unknown. It moves it forward, always keeping it just beyond the edge of what is fully visible. Area 51, in this sense, is not the center of the mystery, but a reflection of that process. A place where the gap between development and disclosure has been especially visible, where the timeline of what exists and the timeline of what is known have remained slightly out of sync. The aircraft that once seemed impossible, like the Lockheed U-2 or the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, eventually became part of documented history, their capabilities understood, their designs explained. And yet, at the time they were first observed, they existed in that same quiet space we've been exploring, where reality was present, but not yet fully recognized. What makes this realization meaningful is not that it answers every question, but that it reframes them. It shifts the focus away from asking, what is being hidden, and toward asking, how does hidden knowledge become known? It reminds us that uncertainty is not always a sign of something extraordinary, but often a sign of something incomplete, something still moving through its own timeline of understanding. There is also something deeply calming about this perspective, especially when we allow ourselves to sit with it without urgency. The unknown does not demand immediate resolution. It does not require us to choose between belief and disbelief. It simply exists as part of a larger system where knowledge unfolds gradually, shaped by discovery, necessity, and time. And when we see it this way, the tension that often surrounds places like Area 51 begins to soften. The mystery becomes less about what might be hidden behind locked gates, and more about how the world itself reveals its layers, one piece at a time. The mainstream perspective, steady and grounded, has guided us through what can be confirmed, through declassified programs, documented technologies, and the realities of how classified systems operate. It has shown us that much of what once seemed inexplicable can be understood through careful analysis and historical context. And this is essential because it anchors us, keeping the exploration connected to evidence and reason. The alternative perspective, quieter but equally important, has reminded us to remain aware of what lies beyond that anchor, not as a leap into speculation, but as an acknowledgement that understanding is always partial in the present moment. It has encouraged us to see the unknown not as a void, but as a space filled with processes we may not yet fully see, but that are nonetheless grounded in reality. And together, these perspectives create something balanced, something that feels both complete and open at the same time. A way of thinking that does not rush to conclusions, but also does not dismiss curiosity. A way of observing that allows for both clarity and uncertainty to coexist without conflict. So as we gently bring this to a close, the image of Area 51 remains, but it feels different now. Less like a distant, impenetrable mystery, and more like a quiet reminder of how knowledge works. A reminder that what we see is not always the full picture, that what we don't yet understand is not necessarily beyond understanding, and that time itself plays a role in shaping what becomes known. And perhaps that is the final thought to carry with you tonight. Not a question that needs answering, but a perspective that stays with you, soft and steady. That the world is layered, that understanding unfolds, and that somewhere, just beyond what we can currently see, there are things that will one day make sense, just as so many things already have. So wherever you are listening from, as the night settles in around you, you can let that idea rest quietly in the background. Not something to solve, but something to observe. Because sometimes, the most interesting part of any mystery is not the answer, but the process of slowly, patiently coming to understand it.